He's a very savvy guy when it comes to finance, when it comes to strategy, when it comes to communications, when it comes to dealing with people. And so we're blessed to have you, Michael. And how about a hand for our board chair? And I want to also thank the rest of our board, our staff, and our community partners for helping Grow Smart, I think, play well above our weight. We're pretty lightweight when it comes to staff and budget, but I think our impact, thanks to all of you and our team, is pretty consequential. And these summits are designed to make the impact even greater. I want to make a special shout out to my colleague of 21 years. It was only supposed to be a 3 to 5 year partnership, but we somehow managed to keep John with us for 21 years. That's John Flaherty, who's the impresario of this event, and he is an uber intelligent, methodical, unflappable, committed, idealistic, get the job done kind of guy. So let's have a big hand for John Flaherty. So I want to offer some reflections about where Grow Smart Rhode Island is at and where we think the state is at as we mark our 25th anniversary, and to outline some of the areas where we think we're excelling and some of the areas where we need to have some significant improvements and some policy changes. I think it's fair to say that Grow Smart Rhode Island has become an influential policy voice and change agent after 25 years. And we've achieved that in a lot of ways. We've built strong policy reform coalitions. We've been very intentional about what I call policy silo busting, which enables us to bring sometimes strange political bedfellows together for some important systemic changes in housing and transportation and community revitalization. We've not just limited ourselves to what's happening in Rhode Island. We're part of a national network of smart growth organizations, and we pay a lot of attention to what other states are doing and try to disseminate that information within our terrific state, as well as looking at what's happening in different corners of our state and highlighting that through awards programs like the one at lunch today and through other means. We've also been advocating for an asset-based economic development strategy during these 25 years, feeling that Rhode Island for too long was focused on what it couldn't do well and not focused enough on what it could do well and what its inherent and assets were that ought to be the focus of our economic development strategy. And I think we're doing that now with offshore wind, with paying more attention to our universities and our colleges, paying more attention to how attractive we are to the outside world. So I think we've made some progress on that front. And we've been concentrating on long-term systems change rather than short-term damage control. And that's both a blessing and a curse in terms of raising money and being visible. Because always talking about the topic du jour, the headline of the day, is sexier and is more headline-grabbing than working in the trenches to improve over the long run our public transportation system, to deal with our housing crisis, and to make the most of our iconic main streets and downtowns. But we decide to go on that long-term track, and I think it's a lane that not too many other people are on, so it's very important we're on that lane. And we're pleased to be part of a national movement, even an international movement. And I think this movement is both commonsensical and revolutionary. It's kind of a strange combination, but I think we managed to thread that needle. It's commonsensical because smart growth, as I see it, is all about promoting growth and development where that does the most good economically, environmentally, and socially. And the movement is revolutionary because it's seeking to move us away from the predominant, autocentric, unhealthy, and unsustainable sprawling development patterns of the last 70-plus years. And not just in Rhode Island, but throughout North America. All the while recognizing that cars are not going away and can still serve a useful but hopefully less dominant role in our daily lives. So our unsustainable development patterns have been shaped by a number, as we see it, of misguided beliefs and of what I would call urban legends. You can call them suburban legends, too. One of these misguided beliefs is that density, having a lot of people living in close proximity to one another, is always bad and inevitably leads to overcrowding, inevitably leads to increased traffic congestion, and inevitably leads to decreased property values. Density done right actually has the opposite effect, but that is not the conventional wisdom. Another chestnut, if you will, that we're trying to tackle is that single-family housing is the best residential choice for everyone, and that moving from cities to suburbs is an essential element of the American dream, and that separating different activities of daily life from one another is a better development approach than allowing these activities to be within walking distance of one another. And the fact we've separated them for so many years is part of why we have the public health crisis that Seema Dixit so eloquently outlined for us. So, there's also a strong equity component to our movement as we push to make this gem of a state a gem for everybody, not just for people who are middle class or upper middle class, so that everyone can access our beauty, our economic opportunities, and our amenities. And that's why we're linking Governor McKee's laudable commitment to increasing Rhode Islanders' incomes with our advocacy for improving transit and encouraging and allowing more location-efficient and mixed-use development in which people can access a lot of their daily needs and services without having to drive a car. We're not expecting most Rhode Islanders to give up owning a car, but if we could get a significant percentage of Rhode Islanders through different development patterns to feel like they can maybe have 2 cars versus 3, or 1 car versus 2, you're talking about saving $10,000 to $12,000 a year for the average Rhode Islander with that kind of shift. That's like half of what Governor McKee is half of the total amount of income increase Governor McKee is shooting for over a 20-year period. So these kinds of reforms, along with an all-in push to tackle our housing crisis, have the potential to not only raise Rhode Islanders' incomes, but also significantly reduce their cost of living. So I'd now like to give you Grow Smart Rhode Island's take on the state's trajectory and the needed course corrections, at least some of them, that we think the state needs to take to fully flourish. And this is very much, in Rhode Island, a tale of 2 cities. There's so much progress alongside so many remaining big challenges that it's a potent recipe. It represents a potent recipe for mental whiplash. Let me start with what I think is unassailably good news. For the first time in decades, Rhode Island is no longer the economic laggard of New England, and we're no longer trailing behind the nation when it comes to some basic measures such as unemployment. In fact, we have consistently had an unemployment rate for the last year and a half that's lower than the fairly low national unemployment rate. And even within New England, which in the last couple decades has been a pretty flourishing economy, we have one of the lowest unemployment rates. That is a sea change from most of my life, and as you can tell from the white hair, I've been around a few years. So the other thing that I think relates to that progress is we seem to be shedding somewhat our self-defeating long-term inferiority complex, or what I've often labeled knee-jerk negativity. Self-flagellation is no longer necessarily Rhode Island's favorite sport. It's still too far up on the priority list, but it's no longer, I think, our favorite sport. So, That's progress. Let's talk about challenges for a few minutes. And we have many of them. And one of the biggest, ironically, is how popular we have become as a state, how much cachet we have with people who either have never lived in Rhode Island or have moved away from Rhode Island and are now either discovering or rediscovering our state. And many of them are affluent. And many of them are from Metro Boston and Metro New York and places beyond. Half of the million-dollar-plus homes in Rhode Island in the last few years have been bought by people from out of state. Overall, I think this influx of educated, affluent, talented people is good for the state. But it comes with some, at least short-term, really negative consequences, especially in contributing to our very serious housing crisis. Zillow recently predicted, for example, that Metro Providence this year will be the 5th hottest housing market among the nation's 50 largest metro areas. That's not necessarily a distinction we're looking for. So we have a dramatic housing supply and cost crunch. It's not only, though, because our state's being discovered and rediscovered by so many people of means, but it's also because our total annual housing production remains stuck at only roughly a third of what it should be. Now, you may scratch your head and say, well, hell, Rhode Island's not a high-growth state. We barely increase our population. But what we and every state in America is experiencing is a decrease in household size. So you can have stagnant population these days and still have steady increasing demand for housing. That, coupled with some modest population growth, means that we are far below the housing production level that we need. So, under the leadership of Speaker Shekarchi, of Representative Speakman, and other legislators, and sometimes the governor as well, Rhode Island is beginning to make the depth and breadth of response that's required to reverse our unsustainable housing trends. I think if these trends are unchecked, they could undo all of our positive momentum and increase the already unacceptable levels of economic and social disparities among our different racial and ethnic groups and among our different age groups as well. So we support and are helping lead the charge for a multi-pronged approach to addressing our housing crisis, with an emphasis not only on securing ideally a $150 million new housing bond, but also proposals by the Speaker, by Stephen Pryor at the Department of Housing, and others to continue and in some cases expand the land use reforms, the infrastructure investments, and the local capacity building that are necessary to substantially increase multifamily attainable housing in our many built-up neighborhoods. And we'll be advocating at the local level for more communities to follow the examples of Providence, of East Providence, of Woonsocket, of Central Falls, and of others in establishing geographically targeted reductions in minimum parking requirements and increases in allowable density levels and building heights. Now, that may sound very unsexy, but it has real significant consequences for development patterns and for tackling this housing crisis. And later on at lunch, we'll be showcasing a prime example of this kind of innovative local action through the award we're giving to the city of East Providence. Now, I want to touch for a minute on a hot button issue when it comes to zoning and land use reform and smart growth. And that's the whole issue of local control. Some people worship at the altar of local control. As a guy who got my political consciousness initially through the civil rights movement and saw how the states' rights movement was such a barrier to achieving civil rights, I do not worship at the altar of local control. I do not feel that it is without merit, but I do not worship at that altar. And I think it's important to understand that the local control Rhode Island municipalities have now is a delegation of authority from the state. It is not constitutionally guaranteed or constitutionally required. And yes, there are many benefits to local control, especially in giving people who understand the neighborhoods in which they're living a significant say in how those neighborhoods evolve and develop. But when there's a multi-decade pattern, as there is, a multi-decade pattern of unnecessarily restricting housing and mixed-use development in built-up, non-environmentally sensitive areas, then we need to be open to some targeted overriding of local control by the state for the collective good. And that, in effect, has happened. And it's been a controversial development, but that, in effect, is what Speaker Shekarchi has done. And I'm not saying he's done it perfectly, but I think his thrust is right on. And I think as we pursue this targeted set of mandates in carrots and sticks, we do have to be conscious of one important thing. One size doesn't fit all when it comes to land use reform. There are rural communities, there are rural neighborhoods where important environmental and infrastructure constraints limit how much density is feasible. We do have to recognize that. So, on to public transportation, another critical challenge, and a missed opportunity in our state. We are not investing adequately in our public transportation system in bus, rail, and ferry, and we need to make our public transportation system a more user-friendly, integrated, affordable option for many more people. And Rhode Island, here's the good news, and I think most of you already know this. Rhode Island has the bones, so to speak, the density, and the blueprint in the Transit Master Plan, which we pushed hard to get it developed, to realize this vision. This is not an unattainable vision. But there's a lack of political will right now to do so, which is why we withheld support for advancing a new downtown transit hub until a significantly greater state commitment is made to adequately fund RIPTA and begin implementing the Transit Master Plan. I see my colleague in the back motioning me to hustle, so I will breeze through some of my other points. Thank you, John. Very briefly, a third critical challenge is one that Seema has so eloquently already outlined, and that is reforming the built environment to encourage more physical activity and to not make it a way of life that if you want to have physical activity, you have to join a gym. Our communities ought to be our gyms. Our neighborhoods ought to be our gyms. And we're taking this issue on, again, as Seema noted, because we have really, in many ways, a public health crisis as well as a housing crisis, with 31% of Rhode Island adults being in the obese category, with 15% of our adolescents being in that category, and with only about 1/4 of Rhode Island adults engaging in a level of weekly physical activity considered adequate for good health. Main Street revitalization, another priority. We want to develop a much more concerted, coordinated effort to strengthen our iconic main streets and downtowns. I think these are the places where the battle to overcome our serious housing challenges is going to be won or lost. It's not going to be won or lost in Exeter or in Richmond or in Hopkinton. It's going to be won or lost in Providence and Pawtucket and East Providence and North Providence and Cranston and Warwick and West Warwick and places like that. And we have a multifaceted Main Street downtown revitalization agenda that leads with the formation of a state Main Street Rhode Island coordinating program to improve and expand Rhode Island's multiple grassroots commercial district revitalization efforts, and you're going to be hearing more about that later today. Rebooting the state historic tax credit, which is a major engine for Main Street and downtown revitalization. Again, I'll give you a real quick spin on that. Our state historic tax credit program has been the single, I think, most powerful economic and community development engine for this state of any program of the last 20 years. it's in trouble right now. It's running out of money, and it's got some new rules that make it very difficult for larger projects to go forward. And we have, with our colleague Preserve Rhode Island, an agenda, a set of proposals to try to turn that situation around. And then, last but not least, land conservation. We've got to maintain this outstanding but fragile urban-rural balance we have in Rhode Island, so we're going to continue to pursue efforts with our environmental allies and others to conserve our prime farmland and forest land. So summing up, from our perspective, Rhode Island remains a very positive and lively experiment, with a soul and a beauty worth fighting for and much untapped potential for expanded economic, housing, and transportation opportunities. I think we have the potential, despite our challenges, to achieve a quality and quantity of life as strong as any other state in the country. But reaching this pinnacle won't happen by accident nor easily, and will definitely take this proverbial village that I see in front of me. So if you're inspired by what you see and hear as today's summit progresses, please consider reinforcing your commitment to our work and our movement through financial support, through coalition building assistance, and our policy advocacy. And among other things, please consider donating to us for the first or 10th or more time. We are a 501c3 organization. Yes, we raise significant funds from some big companies, but we still struggle financially. We don't have an endowment, so don't assume we're on easy street. We're on struggling Main Street. And on each of your tables, there is a card, a tent card, that enables you to contribute to us very easily by accessing the QR code on the tent card. So, I think Grow Smart Rhode Island, in summary, has become a major force for a more user-friendly, opportunity-rich, healthy, and soulful state. And with your continued engagement and support, the best, in fact, is yet to come. Thank you very much.